Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome again to Elevating Your Life. We are going to be elevated today. I have been counting the days for this fantastic interview. I am so happy to share with you today Theresa Bruno. Uh, Her life reads like a fairy tale in many ways. Life, though, fairy tales are often darkened with tragedy, and Theresa's life is no exception. She has suffered more than her share of pain. However, she is still writing her story, and in this chapter, she is vanquishing the fear and shame that gutted her after her husband's death and the sudden collapse of her business by bringing it into the light and talking about it fearlessly. As a founder and designer for Jordan Alexander Jewelry, Theresa designed pieces for Oprah, Julia Roberts, Jennifer Hudson, Pink, Michelle Obama, who named her a favorite designer. She is the host of a fantastic podcast called The Soul Talks. And you just have so much to share. I mean, like your first tragedy being a young Juilliard student and your dream crushed by an injury. So first off, I want to say thank you and welcome for joining us,
Oh my
Theresa.
goodness. Thank you, Paula. And, just thank you for your good work in the world. Thank you for just this
Thank you.
bright, wonderful spirit that you put out there. It is palpable through the radio waves.
Thank you.
And we need a whole
Together.
lot more like you because you are
Oh,
just emanating joy. I love
thank
it.
you.
Thank you
Together
for letting
we
me
are
be
a
on your show.
positive energy in the world.
Yeah.
Thank you, my energy sister. Oh, I love it. Well, I would love you to have you share more of your background and kind of what you went through, those waves, getting through
Sure.
those waves to where you are now.
I feel like everybody can kind of look back on their lives and go, okay, I had this section of my life that went pretty well. And then whether it's a tragedy, a loss, an accident, there's a pivot, right? And then we go on a little while longer and maybe we have another 10 or 15-year stretch. And then there's another thing where God, the universe, spirit gets our attention and we have choices in, how we pivot. The first time I was ever really aware of that was when I was in graduate school. And I had spent my whole life, from the time I was a very young girl, started about 8 years old, which in the music world, that's kind of late, but I could hear music in my head. And I started begging and begging my mother, for a piano. And then it just was, I've sometimes wondered, did I really have this prodigious gift, or I was in a terrible home life that with parents who didn't love each other and they were very angry and it was a chaotic, unhappy place. Does our spirit drive us to do something to overcome, or escape that chaos? Either way, I spent my whole life practicing, just and playing and competing. And my dream was to be a concert pianist. And I just, everything was easy, when it goes right, it just goes right.
Yeah.
Um, I just never had a problem learning big scores, or I loved being out on stage, had no nerves, I
Oh,
knew that, music is transformational to our spirits. I had a teacher once who I was very afraid one day to go out on stage. And you get more fear as you get older. And so I think I was in maybe, about 20 years old or something. And I was about to go out on stage and I was playing a new concerto and I was just really nervous. And she sat me down and she said, what you're about to do is really not at all about you and how you play or how well you play. What you're about to do is go out and give that audience a gift that's going to open up their hearts. It's going to
oh,
help them dream. It's going to help them heal. She said, you get outside of yourself and you start giving, you turn this around. I never walked out on stage the same way again. And I really became to so deeply understand the music that I played as being just truly transformational. So my first big pivot in life was I was in graduate school studying with just one of the greatest teachers ever. And I was playing a Chopin ballade one day, and at this level, I was practicing about 8 to 10 hours every single day. Very disciplined, very dedicated. Um, and I was playing the left hand of the ballade, the coda on the ballade, and without any warning, it had never happened before. There was just intense pain shooting through my wrist, and all of a sudden, my wrist just locked. It was I couldn't move it. I couldn't do anything, play and scream. I couldn't play. I was screaming. It was so bad. Long story short is they put me in a cast for a year hoping it would stabilize. It did not. I had surgery on my wrist and the concert career was over. I was pretty young to deal with something like that, and I had always been extremely prayerful. Prayer came easy as a child, but I didn't have a worked out sense of spiritual direction at that point. I just knew I had to keep going. But that was the first big pivot in my life, was losing the loss of my hand.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And so, how did you determine what your next direction was going to be?
It wasn't very calculated, and it wasn't like I had another dream. I had been dreaming my whole life into just one dream.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did a few things. I taught for a while at a university. I went back to school, first tried to do pre-med and then fainted with the cadavers. And so
That would be me.
ultimately a friend introduced me to the advertising marketing business. And I went to an award show with her, and trying to figure out what in the world can I do with my life. And I saw all these commercials and I thought, well, at the very least, I could write the music for them. But I think I could maybe write, I could create the commercial itself. So that led to a long journey of getting educated in advertising and marketing, doing a heavy 1-year mentorship in an agency, getting various jobs, and then at 29, opening my own agency. Yeah.
I love it. I love it.
But I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything or put a bow around
Mm-hmm.
it, because I don't think we should do that. I think we have to sit in our pain and walk through it. I'm not saying I knew how to do that at 24 when I lost the use of my hand, but I could look back 10 years later, married with 2 precious babies, and go, if I'd been a concert pianist, I would have continued to practice endless hours every day. I would have been on the road. It's a very solitary life. It's a very isolated life. It sounds glamorous because people see you on stage, but
Yes.
most of your life is in a practice room by yourself. A
Yeah.
lot of that. And I could look back by my middle 30s and go, okay, I lost all my dreams in a way, but the just biggest joy of my life is being a mom and a wife.
The
Um,
best. Yeah.
it's the gift you give the world is
Yeah.
our children. And so
Yes.
I don't think I would have had that husband and those babies if I had that concert career.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And the time that you would have been away from them.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I was very lucky in my restaurant years. I worked such long hours, but my kids were able to come with me, learn to work in the restaurant, but it had an apartment upstairs. They could come and have room service.
Oh, that's amazing.
I was very lucky because, that can be heartbreaking, the hours.
Oh, yeah. What kind of food did you serve?
Italian. Yeah.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. The
Okay.
original owner was from Italy, and I started working there in college, and then I managed it, and then I bought it when he retired. So, yeah.
I think that's phenomenal in your journey, Paula, to as a woman and a relatively young woman, um, to buy a business. I applaud you for that. That's an incredible journey.
And the story, how that came into fruition, is amazing. That's
Tell
in
me.
the book.
Tell
I
me about it.
worked all these years, never paid more than minimum wage, but yet I would run the restaurant for him. He'd go off to Italy for a month. I'm running the restaurant. But he always said, when I retire, I'll carry a contract and you can buy the restaurant. And he said, save this much. So I did. I saved it. I saved it. You know, that was all these hours, this work. This was my future. And I loved it. I loved my customers, my employees. When he went, come to the time he was going to retire, and I came walking in the restaurant, and he's sitting there with a couple gentlemen. And he says, oh, they want to buy the restaurant. I want 100,000 down more. That was like $1 million to me.
Yeah.
I didn't even have a credit card. I would just write a check or pay cash. That's how I paid my mortgage. And I went to the bank and they were like, oh, you want to buy a restaurant, little girl? Oh, you know. And I was heartbroken. I was just heartbroken. Couldn't get a loan. And I had this one couple. He was a doctor. Him and his wife were regular customers. And they sat in a booth that they loved. Anyway, I had told them I was going to be buying a restaurant. I was excited. And they came in. He said, so Paula, what's going on with the restaurant? And I must have got a look on my face. And he said,
Yeah.
Paula, what's going on? So I told him. And a
Mhm.
couple days later, knocking on the kitchen door at the restaurant was his accountant with the paperwork. And he co-signed a loan for me to buy the restaurant.
Well, he was one of your first angels.
Yes,
present.
I mean, I was just, you know, their favorite waitress. And a year later, I was able to take him off the loan. And
Phenomenal.
our joke was I was going to name a booth after them. But I mean, you know what that did for my heart? And I was literally, angels, is this not meant to be? After all
But it
these
was.
years, is this not?
How many years did you work for him?
Oh, I was there like 27 years, and it
I
was
thought I
like,
read in your bio 27
yeah,
years.
20 years when I was going to buy it. Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Wow.
And
What
and
was your relationship like with that owner who had been your boss for 20 years when you came up with the money?
he wasn't happy.
Really?
Wasn't happy. I think part of it was a woman buying my restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally got that from a few of my vendors that I would work with. But once I became the owner, they were, you're the owner? Because it was a big restaurant. It sat 200 people.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But I guess you had sort of
Yeah.
learned all the back,
Yeah.
um, I don't know how to say it, the backstory of how to run a big business like that in the 20 years you worked for him.
And you know what what that did to my heart, Theresa,
Yeah.
I will never forget.
You
What,
know, I yeah,
there are
I
some such good people in this world. There
exactly.
are.
And I mean, I
Wow.
always try to say, no matter what our gifts are, turn them around, just like that teacher was teaching me, and to be in service to the world. And boy,
Yeah.
did that guy show up and he was in service.
Yeah. Isn't that
That,
amazing?
yeah,
There's
I
just
love
some amazing
I love
stuff.
it. That's a great story. I
Oh,
love it.
thank you. Thank you for letting me share. I'll never forget it. The picture behind me is my cousin Joe. We were featured on a magazine in the local paper and he
You've
worked
gotten
for
all
me.
kinds of awards and
Yeah.
things over the years. I was looking at all the awards that you've won and just amazing
Open up.
businesswoman,
Yeah,
amazing
thank
businesswoman
you. And I'm,
over and over.
yep, and you too. Well, tell us about your filmmaking business and then your jewelry making design business. I mean, my
Well,
amazing
the
friend.
filmmaking wasn't that unusual. It was where I, artistically gravitated within the overarching marketing advertising world. And so I took just lots and lots and lots of film classes. And in the agency that I ultimately started, and then another one, I was the creative director in those agencies as well as owner. And so I oversaw all of the commercial film work, and I had the opportunity, had an office in LA for about 6 years, had an office in Toronto for about 6 years. And in those periods, I would get opportunities to work on some really great long format stuff. But really, my film work was about my business and creating commercials for the clients we represented. Loved it, had a ball with it, nothing in that business, and I had my solely owned agency for 17 years. I just closed it 2 years ago. Nothing in that I say this in retrospect. I loved it. I was passionate about it. It was so important to me to give my clients kind of an integrity and a visioning in marketing that was unusual in the marketing space. So I gave it everything, but I was aware within myself that it never really fulfilled me artistically. It was more business than art. And so the business was super healthy and never had a loan on it. It was just from the first check I got until I closed the business, it was just a really beautiful, successful business with amazing employees and amazing clients. But I think I think we're right at about 15 years ago. The business was just running. I had great employees. I was working a lot, mostly in LA. And I just had this yearning, to create something, and always loved jewelry. My grandmother was just this beautiful woman who always wore her pearls just so, and then my mother was also very beautiful, and her style was much different than my grandmother's, great big gold cuffs and things. And so I had this kind of thing inside me. And so for a period of 2 years, I just figured out that LA had like one of the biggest jewelry districts in the world. And every Saturday when I wasn't working, I would go to the jewelry district and literally go from stall to stall to stall, just asking questions, looking at what they sold, trying to figure out, how do you do this and how do you buy this, and buying little things here and there to trying to figure out, did I have that design head, you know? And so after about 2 years of a lot of experiments, I'll tell you a funny story. My husband came to visit me and the kids. He would come every couple of weeks when we were in LA. And I was sitting in the middle of I think it was on the floor of the sofa of the home we were renting. And if you know me, you would know this is very antithetical to my personality. With the biggest fishing tackle box you've ever seen and all this fishing wire, trying to learn how to tie pearls, to string pearls, to tie pearls, to figure it out. My husband walked in and he just busted out laughing. He was like, I don't know what you're doing, but this is not you. This has to be a passing thing. He just thought it was hysterical. But after about 2 years of a lot of research, basically, I found this wonderful Turkish Armenian craftsman. His name is Murat. And he could really understand what I was trying to do. And even though I'm not a great, I don't draw extraordinarily well, he understood, how to take, okay, I want to do this gold cuff like my mom's, and I want it really organic, and I want the gold hammered. I don't want it, and
Yeah.
we began to work together just that summer, and we created together about 30 pieces. And Paula, I was so proud of those 30 pieces. You would have thought they were my children. I mean, I felt like
Oh,
I had, like birthed something. But there was never, it truly never went from ear to ear that I was going to start a business. I had a business. I was doing this because I
uh-huh.
just, as an artist, couldn't help myself. So I go back to Birmingham and I have my 30 pieces. And there's a little store where my husband used to buy all of my gifts, and wonderful woman and friend, Karen Trammell. I called her and said, hey, I want you to see what I've created this summer, knowing that she saw so many fabulous designers. And she would say, Theresa, you're crazy. This is terrible. Or, you could be proud of wearing that. And that's all I wanted. It was friend validation. And she was really cool. And she said, Theresa, I think you got something. I think that you should go to New York to this showroom and see what they think about your designs. And I was like, no, I don't know. I'm not doing that. She dared me, and I'm really awful to take a dare. She said, well, if I get you the appointment, will you go? And I was like, okay. Paula, I was green as green gets. I had these 30 pieces rolled up in kind of a dirty piece of velvet stuck down in my tote bag. Like there was nothing professional about it. She gets me an appointment with this wonderful woman, Janet Goldman, in New York at Fragments, which was Janet was a tastemaker in the jewelry world. And she had launched so many of the great designers you see today. If you go in Bergdorf's or Saks or, lots of boutiques, Janet launched all those people. So I walk in there and went, oh my goodness, I am so out of my league. I want to turn and run. Like I really was just like, why did I do this? And so I didn't even know how to show my jewelry. I learned, of course, very quickly how you lay it out on trays and you do all this kind of presentation. I just had my little rolled up dirty velvet. Well, Janet comes in. She's this, very just powerful kind of woman. She came over to the table where I had laid out my pieces and she didn't speak to me. And so I'm beginning to go, okay, I'm uncomfortable. I just want to leave. And she just started taking each piece and picking it up and looking at it. And finally she said, darling, you have a made hand. I didn't really know what a made
Oh,
hand meant, but.
yeah.
And she said, I'd like to represent you. And I said, oh, Mrs. Goldman, I'm so sorry. I've wasted your time. I think I really went on an ego trip. I just wanted to know if I was any good. And she said, no, 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 no. I want to represent you. Can you get me? I think she said something like 60 more pieces in a few weeks. And I went, I,
Uh,
I'm not even incorporated. And I don't know how to manufacture 60 pieces in 2 weeks. Like, I'm not in the business. Left there just so confused, going, okay, what am I supposed to be doing with this? And went to see a friend who was in the PR business, and she happened to be at the New York Times office doing an interview with a couple of young editors. And so I'm discombobulated, I'm frustrated. I don't know what in the world I'm doing with my life. I'm kind of embarrassed. And I'm sitting there, and these young editors, I don't know anything about them or the fashion world or even how PR like that works. And they just start asking me questions, and I start saying, yeah, just really wanted to design something. I love my grandmother's style and just, had an urge to do something different. And so I'm telling them my story and going to see Janet. So about 2 weeks later, I just went home and forgot about it. I went home. 2 weeks later, I get a call from one of the New York Times girls, and she said, hey, is it okay if we share your story? In my head, I thought she meant she was writing a blog. Well, within about a week, I'm sitting in my kitchen on a Sunday morning. Kara Trammell, the same one who got me the appointment in New York, calls and she's screaming into the phone. She said, Theresa, you are on the front page of the New
oh
York
my,
Times Sunday style section.
oh my
And so my husband and I, in our pajamas, ran out to get a New York Times Sunday paper. And it was like a quarter page. It was not like a little, it was a quarter
God. Oh
page.
my gosh.
So then it was like, and even then I wasn't thinking I was starting a business. Truly,
Yeah.
it was just like, how did this happen? The next day, Mrs. Obama's stylist called, and Mrs. Obama had seen the article,
Oh my
story
gosh.
that was in the article, and she said, her stylist said, um, could Mrs. Obama wear the jewelry that was in the New York Times to a state visit in Chile? And I said, oh yeah, sure, she can wear my jewelry. And the stylist went, oh, no, no, no. She can't wear it if it's yours. She wants to wear your business's jewelry. And I said, oh, I'm not incorporated. And she said, well, Mrs. Obama can't. She doesn't, they don't take loans from private citizens. And so I called my husband and I said, do you think I ought to incorporate just so Mrs. Obama can wear my jewelry?
Yes.
And so I did, and
Oh,
she did. And fashion bloggers wrote about it immediately. And then I
oh,
had like 50 stores calling. And so, I mean, my universe
oh,
pivoted.
Teresa, this is so awesome. My gosh, I love
Oh,
it.
it
Oh,
was fairy tale like, and I know we don't have a lot of
yes.
time. I'll
You
just
just
take
never know. Never.
so just in a short amount of time, the PR drove the business. And my first year in business, I had jewelry on, so many celebrities on the cover of so many major
Oh
fashion
my
magazines.
gosh, Teresa.
Things you just never dream could happen to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Um,
I love
and I loved that business, and we grew that business, and we, were in boutiques and big stores all over the US and beginning to grow into Europe. But here's something I would want your listeners to hear from this fairy tale that became like,
Yeah.
this is an old school world, but a huge face plant for me.
Yeah.
I was running two businesses and I was the creative, nexus, if you will. Everything pivoted around what I was creating in the jewelry business as well as in the marketing business. And I was running so fast at these two businesses. I didn't know what was happening right underneath my nose with a very trusted employee and massive fraud over a
Oh,
2
honey,
period.
I'm sorry. Yep.
And I could either pay off all the fraudulent credit cards and all of the things that had not been paid that, were represented as being paid,
Yep.
or I could keep going,
Mhm.
but I'd have to, reorganize, bankrupt. And I'm
Yeah.
just I'm just not wired the bankruptcy way, not that it's the wrong thing to do if you're in that position, but for me, I need to shutter this business. And
Yep.
when I tell you I was brokenhearted and I was so ashamed of myself. And people say, how could you be ashamed? You didn't do it. But what I want your listeners to hear as we are always connecting to our spirits,
Yeah.
I wasn't present enough. It was a great fairy tale ride, but the truth is I couldn't do both those businesses and be fully present. And so I came out of shuttering that business, keeping the marketing business
Yeah.
going, feeling like as a woman in business, I had achieved something that was almost unheard of, and I'd lost it.
Ah,
I disappointed my investors. I disappointed loyal employees who'd been beside me every minute.
oh, Theresa.
So I was just
Yeah.
overwhelmed with this. There's
Mhm.
nothing productive in shame. There's nothing. It
Oh,
just keeps you down and isolated. But that's where I was. And that was the month before COVID started. So I was shuttered the business in around February. COVID started.
Theresa, we have about 1 minute left in the show.
Okay, okay,
It
okay.
flew by. I would like you to share real quick how about your podcast and how
Oh, yes, I'd
people
love
can
to.
learn more about that. Oh my gosh, we're gonna have to do another show. You
Yes,
are.
and I'm sorry I didn't mean to be long-winded. My
Oh,
podcast is called the Soul Talks podcast. And after I shuttered the business, my beloved husband took his life. And so for the last 5 years, it's been a climb out. It's been learning survival tools that I definitely didn't have 5 years ago. So I've wanted to share my journey, my grief, my sorrow, moving it into courage and hope on this podcast and open up spaces for people because I think everybody's in a survival journey.
mhm.
Open up spaces for people to talk about the hard stuff. I talk about suicide and nobody really wants to talk about that.
Mhm.
Everybody has loss or betrayal or pain somewhere.
Yeah.
So the Soul Talks podcast
Oh,
is where I am today,
it's
feeling
so
like it is
fantastic.
my purpose.
Yep. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Big hugs, everybody. Thank you. Big hugs.